I figured I would do a live tonight because I haven't just had a straight up talk about the biggest threat that we as a land are actually facing in quite some time. So the biggest threat, like they say, the elephant in the room. Well, forget elephant. This is a blue whale, or rather a red whale. The red dragon, known as Communist China. I wanted to discuss this because I feel in my soul that as far as the nation state, the land, the geographical boundaries and all that lies within is concerned, and its people included in that, I feel the Red Chinese are the biggest threat. You know, putting aside the spiritual, although there's a humongous spiritual component to all of this, putting aside just the spiritual for a moment, if you're just looking at the physical reality of things, you know, just their sheer insidious nature of the level of warfare that they're conducting upon us. And remember, in fourth generation, also known as hybrid warfare, there is a setup period wherein first they go in, they buy off the leeches, the political parasites that live off of tax dollars and do nothing. So it's not a symbiotic relationship like it was originally intended to be. It ends up being parasitic, where these leeches that are killing the host, taxing the host, the tax chattel, who work basically to their fingers to the bone, just to, pay for these people to live lavishly. Well, what happens is enough is never enough with these people because their level of greed, it's unwavering. It's uncompromising. Like, there's never enough for those people. So what happens is they've sold Red China the rope that they would use to hang us with. Nixon opened the door with détente. Well, really, the global Western elites, the Western elites opened the door with using Nixon to do the détente. And what that did was it ultimately allowed for the likes of Deng Xiaoping, who came after Zhu Enlai and Mao, it ultimately allowed for Deng Xiaoping to basically conduct his ultimate aims of building China up quietly, secretly, according to new doctrines that were then in the works, especially by the late 80s. Because you got to remember, by the late 80s, China, though still having a massive army and air force, didn't really have much of a navy. They were mostly a land and air power. And even then, their technology level was nowhere like it was by the late 90s and beyond. They'd always been a large land power who we had contested with in the Korean War, who ultimately saved North Korea from the Western powers who fought under the UN mission, because it was a UN mission. It was called the United Nations mission, and it was there to preserve South Korea, and it ultimately went into North Korea and really had North Korea on the ropes. North Korea barely had any territory left of what was in Korea, and it was almost totally annihilated and vanquished. The leadership was even pushed into China. They had to go into exile there until the Chinese crossed the Yalu. They crossed the Yalu River border between China and the Korean Peninsula. And they pushed back all the Western powers, us included in that. They pushed them back past the 38th parallel. And then a sort of seesaw conflict ensued where one side would make a little bit of gains and then the other side would push them back and then make a little bit of gains. And it went on like that for a few more years. So what happened was in 1953, there was an armistice signed between the Western UN forces and the Chi-Coms and North Koreans. But the Chi-Coms have always depicted us, even in their old 50s era propaganda, they've always depicted us as bankers and snakes. Snakes. As in, snakes that betray, that you can't trust. They're called, they look at us as if we are snakes. So, what am I saying? I'm basically saying that throughout the period of, throughout the time of Deng Xiaoping was when they had begun to put these plans into the works. And it all started with the détente being opened by Nixon. They saw the ability to be able to bribe and coercion through and extortion through capturing these political parasites doing dirty things that they ought not be doing, to compromise them, and also bribing the ones that were willing to be bribed. And they started to implement their CCP regime policies right here in the good old of US of A. But that was to set us up for complete, utter, total disaster. It was to come later down the road. So what I'm saying is that was the very initial phases of the setup for the hybrid war doctrines, where in the later phases comes the lightning fast, I mean truly lightning fast. We're talking faster than Blitzkrieg. This is true lightning war. Because once you have your Trojan shock armies inside your enemy's nation through the setup phase, you're now able to make a run, make an advance upon all objectives as you strategically have purchased properties in that said target nation very near their objectives. So their logistical supply lines are extremely what? They're extremely short. If you have a CCP property near an objective that needs to be captured, well, you can strategically buy a property that is no more than, say, 5 or 10 miles away from the objective. Well, how about that? 5 to 10 miles. Do you know how short of a supply line that is? It don't take trucks to drive supplies from a logistical point to the frontline fighting units. It doesn't take them very long to drive 5 to 10 miles, does it? No, that's very short. Very rapidly, these units that emerge from the CCP properties, their muster and assembly points or logistical centers, it won't take them very long to move on their objectives at all. As I've shown in all my work, and in my stories, both the typed and the audiobook that you're seeing, what happens? Well, what happens is these CCP, these Chi-Com, and allied forces like the Russians, I can't leave them out. They're going to be the second biggest contributor to the invasion that's coming here. You see these CCP, Russian, and other allied forces emerging from the CCP regime properties, because China is going to let their allies use their properties too, of course, as staging areas for their troops. So they're going to emerge. They're going to race on to their objectives, and they're going to capture them extremely fast, whether that's a large, medium, or small city, whether it's a key invasion route, whether it's a bridge, whether it's a power plant, whether it's whatever, an installation, whatever. They're going to take all that stuff immediately, fast, rapidly, lightning quick. And the external components that are racing in from Mexico, Canada, and from beach landings or parachuting in, the paratroopers, those are going to be a rapid reinforcements. So they're going to rapidly drive in deep inland and fan out, and they're going to fan out to assist the Trojan shock armies that are already in here doing the heavy lifting, that already have the supply points set up along key invasion routes so that the externals can stop and get gas. They can gas up. They can get extra ammo if they've expended ammo. They can re-up on ammo, gas, food, water, get maintenance done on their vehicles, whatever, what have you. That will already be in motion, and that was all set into motion by the likes of the political parasites and even the Western elites. So the Western elites, they set themselves up for a failure long ago because they basically neutered and castrated their own power base. But of course the CCP helped. These Eastern elites have helped. They've had their tentacles in this nation for a long time as well. So, you will most certainly be witnessing this. And we know they want us to do what? They want us to collapse first from the inside. They want us to have an economic, financial, food, fuel collapse, all of the above. Economic would encompass the supply chain, and the financial would encompass the money, food and fuel too, because that would affect the economy, right? And it would affect the well-being of the people. So they want all of that to occur. Then they want a Syrian-style internal conflict to erupt because this nation's enormously vast. You know what I shared? I shared a map battle. From the Syrian internal conflict of the Battle of Damascus. It starts with the civil unrest, which was the riots. It starts with that, but then all these different factions emerge. It shows the whole Battle of Damascus. And only 7 factions are shown in that battle, but that's 7 factions fighting over one city and one area. So there were more factions in other parts of Syria, just so you know. But that was basically a 7-way battle. So the Chi-Coms, the Russians, their allies, they're waiting for stuff like that to happen here. So, and it will. But that has to happen first, before we even get invaded. Now, yes, true enough. The documentaries I made, which showcase the actual, real doctrines of hybrid warfare, those are 100% real doctrines of hybrid warfare, wherein I show the mechanics. I'm showing you the mechanics of how it works, down to the last minute detail. Nobody else is showing you that. Sure, other people are talking about it, and that's all good and well. I think that's great that other people are saying, hey, there's going to be a foreign invasion, coming down the road, folks. You might want to get ready. I think that's wonderful. But I take it many steps further, and I break it down for people. I show you the last mechanical, finite, most minute details of how it all works. So that's the logistics. That's down to like a street level view, like through a character perspective. That's everything. That's a macro level map view, like a sort of map, sort of like that. Just for example, like that Syrian internal conflict map I just posted shows. But I show it, with a little low budget. It's low budget, but just the same, it's very, very realistic because I have real units on that map. Those are all real units. I even threw in the reactionary civilians that would no doubt react, click up together, and try and fight it back. But remember, that's a best case scenario. I did it as a best case scenario for us, where we did not have a collapse, and we did not have an internal conflict first. That was a best case scenario for us. So I did that because I felt that if I showed a best case scenario and we still got our asses handed to us royally, badly, then people can easily imagine the worst case scenario, which is actually what we will be facing. What is the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is that we do have an economic, financial, food, fuel collapse, etc., etc. Everything collapses. And we also then have a internal conflict which saps this nation of a lot of its most capable people that would have been able to form these partisan groups and be mildly, at least mildly effective at fighting the occupation forces of China, Russia, and their allies that come and take over and occupy us after they take over. So there would at least have been a mildly, moderately effective partisan element had there not been an internal conflict first. That's why do you think China and Russia wants us to collapse? Because they're austere-minded. They're very austere. They're very frugal people. They don't like to have to spend more if they know that they don't have to. Them seeing us collapse and rip ourselves apart shows them that they don't have to, go head first into this land. They can just let us do it for them so that after the fact, after it's over and they take over, they're not going to have problems with partisans because they were mostly all destroyed. Anybody that would have been effective against them would be gone. That is so cruel. It's cruel. It's sick. It's evil. But it shows their mentality of austerity, of being austere, not wanting to commit more resources if they don't have to, if they know they don't have to. That's being austere and frugal. They're not like the West. They don't have the same mindset as the West in terms of like military campaigning and conquest and everything. No, if they know there's a way to do it easier, then they're going to opt for the path of least resistance. Because that makes sense, right? It makes the most sense. Sure, they could come in right now and kick our head off like they were Ong Bak or something. They will all go all Ong Bak on our ass. They could do it now easily and still crush us. But their occupation forces would be harried and heavily engaged in having to divert resources from the mission of colonization, and they would have to divert resources from their primary objective of colonization and divert that into suppressing a revolt from the partisans that would rise up and resist the occupation. So keep that in mind at all times. That's very real. So now China is this behemoth, ginormous military force. They're the biggest in the world. Not just their active duty being the biggest of all active duty forces in the world, but they're the biggest overall. When you take in their reserves and you take in their paramilitary, which is all combat grade, they're all militarily trained. Paramilitary means they're parallel military forces. They have a parallel military. Like they have another military. They have two militaries. Their parallel military, their paramilitary, is their People's Armed Police, which are like the Praetorian Guard of the CCP. They're like a fanatical, elite, sort of like Waffen-SS type of like combat force. Plus, I guess you could lump them in with the Waffen-SS or the Republican Guard that Iraq had, or the Iranian Pasdaran, or whatever. But they're like China's answer to that, which those are all paramilitary forces that I just mentioned too. The Iraqi Republican Guard, the German Waffen-SS, those were parallel military forces too. They weren't part of the actual regular military. They were parallel combat structures. So China has their own humongous, ginormous paramilitary. Besides their People's Armed Police, they also have the National Militia, and they have the Marine Militia. The Marine Militia is a huge formation that is basically like mixing our Marine Corps reserves with our Coast Guard. Like, that's the sort of mission they have. They had threatened the Philippines with this force before. They can use any type of vessels from hand-me-down naval vessels, because their navy is the biggest navy and most technologically advanced navy in the world right now. It is. That's uncontested. It's irrefutable. But they have passed down older vessels to their marine militia. And they also tend to use fishing boats, which is pretty insidious and crafty. But, their marine militia, if they threaten Philippines, I mean, Philippines doesn't have a very, capable, powerful military, but if they're like third line paramilitary can threaten the Philippines the way they have recently in past years and scare the Philippines to death, then their first and second rate forces are immensely more powerful. We're talking a third-rate paramilitary force threatened the Philippines. Like they could have landed on Philippine Islands and captured the Philippines. I'm sure the Marine militia could have done it all by itself. It's huge. It's a big formation. They have a lot of vessels. And there's the National Militia, which is like a ground formation. It's like the CHICOM paramilitary equivalent of what our National Guard is. They have similar missions. Although our National Guard has been deployed overseas due to manpower requirements, and originally it was intended that the National Guard be used at home, either in home defense roles or in emergencies, which is very similar to the paramilitary National Militia of China. They also have basically a paramilitary combat engineer force called the National Construction Corps. And this large formation is a construction oriented formation. It's like combat engineers because they're also armed. They're armed and trained in combat. There's also their PLA Strategic Reserve, which is like also for home defense purposes, but it's like the third line reserves of the PLA, because they have regular reserves for the PLA, which are actually part of their regular military, whereas the PLA Strategic Reserve is just like a third line paramilitary force. It's paramilitary, it's intended to be staying at home, and it only goes under the PLA command if there was like a mission inside of China itself that required them. So that's the whole reason why they are considered a paramilitary force. But that's all the different paramilitary forces China has. And altogether, they comprise some 20 million men. 20 million. 20. Then you got their reserves of some 5 million. 5. As of 2022, they are at 5 million reserves. Newest numbers. Also, their active duty, which is their regular PLA, which is their army, their PLAN, which is their Navy, their PLAAF, which is their Air Force, and then their Strategic Missile Forces, or some call it Strategic Rocket Forces, whichever. I've heard them used interchangeably. Those are the 4 branches of the PLA, or of the regular military, I'm sorry. But yeah, those are the 4 active branches. So now, when you take all of that into account, they have some 29 million men under arms. 29 million. 29 million. It's almost 30 million. That's a freakishly gargantuan conventional military force. And they've all been extremely modernized, including how their force structure is. How they've reorganized their entire force structure. The way their units are basically arrayed. Like, they still have humongous formations called group armies, but they don't have these humongous, like, unwieldy corps-size units. Now they've broken them up into a series of divisions and independent brigades that can act independently of each other according to mission requirements. They're combined arms units. Whereas in the past, you had like a CHICOM infantry corps of nothing but infantry. Now you have or a Chi-Com group army that was like mostly entirely infantry, or like a tank corps that was just a whole entire corps of nothing but tanks. No, they broke it up and they combined them into combined arms formations. Independent brigades and divisions, even regiments. Some corps still exist, like corps, as in like the unit size right beneath what a group army is in the Chinese structure of unit sizings. The corps tend to be more of like a national militia type of thing, or like a marine militia sort of thing. They mostly did away with corps in the active military of the PLA. Now it's group army, then division, then they have brigade, then they have regiment, and then they have battalions. But divisions and brigades are both broken up into battalions. Like typically in the Chinese force structure, a brigade typically has 8 subordinate battalions, and a division has some 16 subordinate battalions. Some of ours do too, but we also have battalions, or in our cav units, which are squadrons. They're called squadrons. Don't ask me why. I was in 2nd Squadron in 3rd ACR, which was called Saber Squadron. That was like the nomenclature. The second Squadron was called Saber. And our artillery battery, 2-3 howitzer battery, was called Lion Battery. Well, we basically had 6 different companies, including our battery of artillery, within our squadron. But the Chi-Coms, it's typically eight battalions with 8 companies per battalion. And a Chi-Com company is about 130 to 140 men per. So their battalions are typically in the 900 to 1,000 man range, whereas ours can range from the 650 to occasionally 1,000 man range. Occasionally. Not always. Usually our battalions are on the smaller size, where it's like in the 650 to 750 number. Usually. Not always, but usually. So the Chi-Coms have bigger forces overall. They're organized in a similar manner, where they have combined arms group armies that are broken up to where a lot of their divisions and brigades have their own air defense, their own armor, their own infantry forces that are mechanized, their own everything really, their own combat engineers, their own. Each group army usually has either a spec ops battalion, and in some cases they have a whole brigade of spec ops. Every group army has special operations forces. So these are potent fighting forces just by the way they're organized alone. They train extremely hard compared to how our forces now train in the woke military. They have ample stockpiles of ammunition. Some sources claim they have more ammunition than anyone on Earth. And I believe it too, because just one look at their industrial production, their armaments capabilities, their armament manufacturing capabilities, they have grown tremendously. They've been building factories since the late 90s, and most of them have come online about 5 years ago. Now they're churning out freakish quantities of things. Also consider, China had already had a fairly decent-sized arms manufacturing industry to begin with, even before the 90s. They'd been cranking out artillery shells, rocket artillery, rifles, bullets, everything you can think of. They've been cranking out for many, 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 many years, nonstop, because they, like Russia, figure that quantity has a quality all its own. Like Nikita Khrushchev once said in the Soviet Union, the Soviet premier. And he was correct. I mean, just take one look at the attrition going on in Ukraine, how Russia is able to expend, 3,600,000 plus shells? 3,600,000 plus shells. And they're not even anywhere near expending any of their stocks, much less the amount of shells they produce in a year. Same with their rocket artillery, like their Grad rockets and everything else, their larger systems they have too. They have larger rocket systems of the 300 millimeter range. Those things are huge, but they're expending tons and tons and tons and tons of rockets and shells for howitzer artillery, like I just described in their most recent numbers that were counted. So they're not anywhere near that. So in NATO war drills, here's a for instance, and this is true. In NATO war drills, France and Britain in 8 days, in just 8 days in these drills, have expended all of their howitzer artillery shells, all of them. And America, in 10 days, expends all of its yearly production. Its annual production is expended in 10 days. Can you fathom that? And here's Russia. All these months in Ukraine, we're going on month number 6 now. They're sitting in there in a 5-month-long conflict, and they've expended millions of shells. It'll be 4 million pretty soon, just at the rate that they average in a day. 20,000 shells a day. 20,000. 20,000 a day. Folks, and China has even more production capabilities and stocks than Russia does. China has the most on Earth. So take all of that into consideration here. China is the blue whale in the room. Forget elephant. Russia's like an elephant. China's a blue whale. They have more tanks, including all their storage numbers, more infantry fighting vehicles and APCs, and also armored fighting vehicles. If you really include all 3 of those categories in one category, it's over 60,000 vehicles if you combine all 3 of those categories, like their MRAPs, their tracked and wheeled APCs and IFVs. You combine all of it into one, it's in excess of 60,000 vehicles. If you're just going and looking at the APCs and IFVs, it's basically 40,000. It's 39-something thousand. It's huge. I mean, we only have 20,000. We have half of that. We have half of what they have. Half of it. Russia has 10,000 more than we do. They're sitting in between us and China in terms of the numbers of like APCs, IFVs, and of course, if you count their armored vehicles, it's more. But these two nations combined, just their tank fleets and their armored vehicle fleets, are just, if you combine what Russia and China has, plus the amounts they can produce in a year that their factory capacities are. See, Russia, I know what their tank production is per year, and I know what their fighter and tactical fighter bomber production is a year. And they can produce more than we can. Russia can. And I've mentioned it before. I have the paper somewhere. I wrote it down. Oh, but I know that China's is 3 times more than what Russia can produce. So China massively swamps us. They massively swamp us in production of tanks and fighters and fighter bombers, tactical ground attack aircraft. Both of them have a lot more bombers than we have, strategic bombers too. So China has the biggest combat air fleet in the world. Although Russia has the most strategic bombers of any nation, and I'm including their storage numbers, their Tu-16s that they keep in storage, and Tu-95s that some of which sit in storage. Their newest bomber aircraft, the Tu-160s, plus their Tu-22Ms. Yeah, Russia has a lot of bombers. a lot of them. And they're all maintained in storage. Sort of like how China has an additional nearly 6,000 artillery pieces of all varieties, self-propelled, towed, and howitzer, that are in storage, in addition to what they have active, which is a humongous amount. Plus, the same is the case with their tanks. Much of China's tank fleet belongs to the reserves and their paramilitary and is thus kept in storage and thus maintained in storage. If you all are interested in the actual specific numbers, I've done many a live stream where I go over all of the numbers. I don't have the pieces of paper in front of me, and I really don't feel like digging them out. I'm being sort of lazy right now, y'all. I mean, I could, but it'll take me a second. It'll take my focus off of what I'm saying to go look for all of it. I'll try and dig through it a little bit here, see if I can find any of them. I write down so many facts and figures and stats and everything, and it's hard to keep up with all the papers I write it on because I just get into researching and I just, grab a piece of paper, be it a piece of receipt paper, be it a piece of blank, scratch paper or whatever, and I write these things on them. And then when I put them up, I forget where I put the stuff. I want to be precise. When I give numbers, I want the numbers to be precise. That's why I write everything down, because if I don't write it down, I'll forget it. And then, my precision will be off, and I don't want that to happen because, I've got to be very precise. Okay, I just found one that has the specific numbers of their fighters, tactical fighter bombers, and strategic bombers of China. Okay, we've got older ones all the way up to the newest. And I'm talking about the older, heavily modified aircraft that have had new radars, new avionics put in, everything from the radar suite to the computers and avionics is all new in these aircraft. I'm talking about the older, heavily modified ones. And the reason they were kept is due to their maneuverability and dogfighting, even though most aircraft fights tend to be with missiles and not dogfighting. But you never know. Doctrines change all the time in war. Even aerial combat doctrines change. But here we go. They have the J-82Bs, which are their newest, most modified iteration of the J-8, which those are older. They're a lot older. They still have 410 of those. They have the J-10, which is more like, it's a lot like the F-16, very much like our F-16. It almost looks like our F-16 from some angles. The J-10, they have 600 J-10s. 600. So there we go. There's already 1,010 aircraft right there. There's the J-11. Extremely modernized plane. The J-11 is a very new aircraft. They have 500 of those. So there we go. There's 1,510 combat aircraft. Then there's their J-15, which is for their Navy, but I'll just throw that in anyway. They have 150 of those. They have the newest JF-17, which they've exported a lot of those to Pakistan, but they've kept about 170 for themselves. That's one of their newest planes, the JF-17. It's mostly for export, but they do have some. They have about 170 that they've kept. There's the J-20, the stealth aircraft that they've mass-produced. The numbers that I could get that were the most up-to-date were 200 plus. 200 plus. The plus could be anything. I don't know how much more than 200 they've got now, but the last count was 200. But they're continually being produced, so I didn't get anything beyond the 200 number. Now, for the tactical fighter bomber aircraft, they've produced 2,400 of these, but they've got only 400 in service as of right now. I don't know what they've done with the other 2,000. It didn't say if they exported those or if they stored those away, but if they stored those away, that's a ginormous fleet of ground attack aircraft. And these JH-7s, man, these are like more advanced than the Q-5s that they had, which the Q-5s are pretty good, but the only thing about the Q-5 is it doesn't have the range that the JH-7 has. The JH-7 has the ability to carry more weight. It's got longer range. It's got newer radars. Got newer avionics. It's a very, very adequate, very up to task, a ground attack plane. They've produced 2,400 of them, though. Only 400 are in service. The Q5, they still have 600 of these. 300 are still in service, but the other 300 are in storage. Over 1,300 have been produced, but the other number, the rest of it, the 700 other, they were sold. Those were sold. They were sold off to other nations. So they have 600 that they've kept of the Q5s, but they have 400 active of the 2,400 produced JH7s. I don't know if that other 2,000 figure, I don't know how many of them they've sold, if they've sold any. I don't know how many they kept, but if they kept a lot of those, man, they got a hell of an ability to crush ground targets with those. Now we go on to the heavy strategic aircraft, the heavy strategic bomber aircraft. They have, of the H-6K heavy strategic bombers, they have 242. And the H-20 stealth aircraft, their numbers as of right now are a state secret, is what it says. Unknown. The numbers of H-20 that have been produced the last few years are unknown. They've had test flights for the past 2 years, and it went on to production in unknown numbers. Unknown. So what do we got here as a grand total? In actuality, the grand total, if you include what's been stored away, 2,852 aircraft, total combat aircraft, including whatever's stowed away. And I'm not counting the other 2,000 of the JH7s that were produced, because I cannot count those, because I don't know if they were sold. I don't know if they were stored. I don't know what the deal is with the other 2,000 that were produced. I cannot say. All I can say is, after tallying all that up, 2,852 is a grand total. Combat aircraft, folks. Combat aircraft. That's more than what we got by a humongous gulf. It's like a little bit over 1,000 more than what we've got. So that's just China, folks. That's just China. That's not even adding Russia's fairly big-ass combat air fleet into the mix. And I didn't even include all the Chinese naval combat aircraft in that either. China has 410 naval aircraft, and we have something like 580 or something like that. It's pretty close to 600 that we have. But China's pretty not that far from us in terms of their numbers of naval aircraft. We do have a bigger naval aircraft fleet, but it's not much bigger than China's naval aircraft. But Russia only has like 300 and something. I don't have Russia's papers right now in front of me. It's like 300 something naval aircraft. I don't remember their exact numbers. I know it was in the 300s. So Russia and China both have very, very huge combat air fleets. China's obviously is the biggest by a long shot. But after China, of our enemies, Russia would be the second biggest in combat aircraft. That's all categories: strategic heavy bombers, tactical fighter bombers, which are specifically for ground attack missions where they, hit specific targets. Then that's to help their ground troops usually. But they can also use them for strategic missions where they fly some behind enemy lines and hit like communication centers or whatever they're trying to get, or like hard points like fortifications or whatever they're trying to go after. They can use them in strategic hitting, like strategic attack missions, but they're typically for supporting ground operations, specifically to support the ground troops. That's why they're called tactical fighter bombers. They can't carry as much as the heavy strategic bombers, but they're, made for tactical reasons. Although they can be used for strategic strikes, they're typically for helping the ground troops in battles on the ground. So, like, they can call in precision airstrikes, and a tactical fighter bomber will swoop down and drop some heavy, payloads on the whatever target they're trying to hit, or they'll strafe enemies with their exploding ammunition in their nose cannons or whatever. That's what they're for. And then you have fighters. And usually fighters can be multi-role, meaning they can be equipped with ground attack ordnance on their hard points, whether that's a few free fall, munition loads, or whether that's, a laser guided munition or a satellite guided munition or whatever. It can even be like an air to ground missile, like an anti-radar missile, where you can like the harm missiles, they're called, or the AMRAAMs. I'm sorry, they're the AMRAAMs, where they like we have, that are designed to hit anything with a radar. Like that can be a vehicle, it can be a place at an airport. It can be anything. Anything that has a radar, they're designed to go after the AMRAAM missiles. So, Chi-Coms, the Russians, have all the same stuff, as far as like the different types of ordnances and munitions that they can use in combat. I mean, they make their own, and they're of different names and their own technologies, but they've got basically all the same stuff we do. They've got satellite guided stuff, they've got laser guided stuff, they've got stuff that goes after radars. Some of them even use, they of course have those what do they call those humongous conventional things like the daisy cutters. Damn, I don't know why that slipped my mind all of a sudden. I've talked about it before, like the Russians have the KAB 500. Oh, thermobaric. Of course. Yeah, the Russians have thermobarics, and of course the Chinese do too, obviously. Even we do. They have everything that we've got. So, and they've got a shit ton more of it. Way more of it. So, China, though, is just vastly bigger in every category than anyone else. The only thing they're lacking in terms of military is their nuke arsenal. But as long as their nuke arsenal works, as long as it works, it's all up to date, which it is. They've got their DF-17s, they've got their DFZF that they can put on other missiles, other types of ballistic missiles, and so on. Which a DFZF is like a warhead that detaches as a hypersonic glide vehicle from a regular missile. And it can weave and bob and evade at a very high rate of speed any type of enemy defenses. So the DFZF is a hypersonic glide warhead, whereas the DF-17 is a full-on hypersonic missile. And then, of course, they have their fractional orbital bombardment system, which can circumnavigate the Earth and hit its target, which they've perfected it by now, folks. It can hit its target extremely accurately, even if it's only off by a few miles. When you're using a nuke, you still hit what you were going for. So that is China in a nutshell. They have all that. We don't. We don't have that. We don't. We're still in the testing phase for a hypersonic. We're still in the testing phase. We don't even have any sort of fractional orbital bombardment system like they do. I'm sure Russia has it too. I mean, China and Russia cooperate on a lot of military tech. They're thick as thieves. They're the closest allies, and people try to play it off like they're not allies or that this is a new thing. No, this ain't new. They have formed a key strategic alliance. They've rekindled it, I should say, because they've always been allies since like way back in the 50s. Then they had their little misunderstandings, which likely got exaggerated and turned into the so-called Sino-Soviet split. But I think that was a series of diplomatic misunderstandings on policy that occasionally flared up here and there. But really and truly, if China hated Russia so much, the Chinese would have kicked Russia while they were down. But the Russians see China as a major friend, because even China didn't kick Russia when they were down like the West did, and I'm not for China, I'm not for Russia, I'm not for the West. They're all evil, but I'm talking about from their perspective, from the Russian perspective. They looked at China during the 90s, And here's China sitting there building themselves up. They're not bothering anybody. They're not bothering Russia. They're not bothering anybody. I mean, yeah, they did invade Vietnam, true enough, but then after that, they focused on building themselves up and trying to take the West down, and the West was the one giving Russia all the heartache and kicking them while they were down. So Russia hates the West now. Like, they hate the West. There's been initiatives in the past where they wanted to build a unified Europe with the western part of Europe. You know, there's been talk about from Portugal, or from, what was it, from Lisbon to Vladivostok. Well, that's never going to happen now. You know, they look at China and they see a friend in China, because China never kicked them while they were down. And they could have. They sure could have, but they didn't. China wasn't bothering anybody at the time. They were busy doing their own thing to try to take down the West. They were trying to play and pretend like they were cooperating with the West, but in reality, they were plundering and pillaging all our secrets. They stole everything. They've got the crown jewels. Not only that, but even as time went on, they're the ones that hacked solar winds. They've got all the nuclear secrets. That's even been admitted to by our rulers, or our leadership, by the Pentagon. So they having our nuclear secrets, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to shut it off when they invade. You know, they passed all that on to their allies too. So in theory, any one of them can shut it off. It could be China, it could be Russia, it could be anyone. They don't have to EMP us, folks. They don't need to use an EMP. Why would they want to? They want our infrastructure as much intact as they can have it. They don't want to spend all this money to rewire and, you know, fix everything if they don't have to. They're not going to EMP strike it to where they got to go through and rip all the wiring out and then redo all that. That's expensive. That's very expensive. Sure, they're going to destroy a lot over time with conventional weapons. And they're, you know, when they invade, they will use some nukes. I've even had dreams about them nuking certain places like DFW, Austin, Phoenix, you know, but these were like tactical nukes. And even when in my dreams that they nuked these places, they didn't nuke everything, everybody. Just certain cities. That was it. Just certain key cities. And it was only because there were installations in those places. They're probably only going to use a small handful of strategic nukes, but most of the nukes, they're probably only going to use a few dozen tactical-sized nukes. Not these ginormous city killers, but they're going to use these smaller, you know, we're talking like between 5 and, you know, 25 kiloton yields. Not very big. Not very big. They're going to use these small tactical nukes, and they're only going to use it when they feel they absolutely need to, and as long as it doesn't interfere with their overarching objectives. They already have Trojan shock armies inside this country. Why do they need to use nukes unless it's absolutely necessary? They don't. They don't. Which is why they're not going to use very many at all. Only in places they feel it's absolutely necessary and where it's not going to hurt their objectives of seizing the farmland intact without it being contaminated with cesium, to where they can't plant anything or eat anything safely from it. Nope. They're not going to go overboard on the nukes, everybody. They don't need to. But back to the size of the Chinese nuke arsenal. China has had some roughly 20 to 22 tons of enriched, you know, weapons-grade uranium in the past 25 or so years. They've also had 2 to 4 tons of plutonium. What does that mean? That means they've had enough, in theory, to build and have built up to 1,200 nuclear weapons. 1,200. So that's where the high ball estimate of 1,200 comes from. The low ball is like 400 to, you know, I've seen even as low as 350, but that's not true. That would mean that every single one of their silo-based ones would have to have 1 nuke on it when they can carry 2. I've seen it as low as 350 to 400. I've seen it as high as 1,200. I like to go with the most reasonable logical estimate of some 1,000. Some 1,000. And that's based upon the fact that all the new silos they're building, their road mobile stuff, the amount of warheads they can put on each one. They have their DF-41, their DF-31. They've got their, DF-26, their DF-21 series. They've got their, their DF-17s, which are hypersonic. They've got the DF-ZFs they can put on, which are hypersonic glide vehicles, which can either be conventional or nuclear. They've got all of these different missiles. They've got an enormous land-based missile force. Enormous, Got a DF-100 cruise missile. So they've got that's hypersonic. So they've got all these different hypersonics, the Chinese do. Of course the Russians have their Zircon, they've got their the one they used in Ukraine, that damn what do you call that one? Damn it. The one they test fired. Hold on, let me find the I always forget names of things. It's irritating. Starts with a K. Dang, what was that? I have it written down here somewhere. Anyway, it'll come to me. It'll come to me. Besides that, they've test fired actual hypersonics, and they've worked. The Kinzhal, that's it. I knew it started with a K. I was like, damn, it was like on the tip of my tongue, and I couldn't say it. They've got that. They've got the Zircon. They've even got two other ones. If I could find the paper with their stuff. I put my Russian stuff in another pile. I'm just looking at my Chinese stuff right now. All the Chinese things, mostly. Yeah, they have all these, both China and Russia have hypersonics, and they're on like their, respectively, whether we're talking about China or Russia, by now, they're on their like 5th series, their 5th designs each of new hypersonic weapons, at least their 5th, while we're struggling to get one out of the testing phase and into mass deployment, which we've not done yet. We have not managed to mass deploy any hypersonic weapons as of yet, as of the time I'm recording this. As of the time I'm recording this. Today is what? September the 4th, the 5th? What is it? September the 4th, okay. Yeah, today, as of the time I'm recording this, September 4th, we do not have any hypersonic weapons in mass deployment in 2022. So China and Russia are either on their 4th or 5th designs by now, so they've far surpassed us. They've far surpassed us. They have a humongous leap ahead of us. It's ridiculous. But China is ginormous, folks. They've got the biggest land-based strategic missile forces in the world, and that's considering all of their nuclear and conventionally armed as well, ballistic missiles of all sizes and ranges, and cruise missiles of all sizes and ranges as well. So, I've done a video, respective to both the Chinese and Russian missile forces. If anybody's interested in those, they're very short and they're a long ways back. If you scroll back far enough, and they're very short videos. They're not live videos. Although I've mentioned them before in the lives, they're quite a ways back in my video list. I mean, not like immensely far back, but they're a ways back. But yeah, China's immensely humongous, folks. I'm going to look at the reserves real quick while I mill through some of these. Or not reserves. I'm going to look at the chat. I don't know what I'm thinking, folks. I got crazy words getting jumbled up, minced in with what I'm thinking. I'm going to look at the chat while I look through these papers. I'm looking at so many things right now at one time. I'm horrible at multitasking. I'm terrible at multitasking. Okay, let's see what everybody's saying real quick. Hey, Cheeto, great to see you, man. Great to see you. Yeah, learn Mandarin, everybody. Learn Mandarin. And at the very least, learn Russian. It's probably a lot easier than Mandarin. The Cyrillic alphabet is a lot closer to the Roman alphabet that the Germanic and Romance languages, the Latin-based languages they use. It's the Cyrillic alphabet is what Eastern Europeans from generally Russia and Belarus, Ukraine, and some of the Baltic states use it. They use Cyrillic too, like Serbian and Bulgarian. Yeah, you can if you can learn Russian easier, then you should learn some Russian, but especially you want to learn Chinese. They're going to be like the humongous, ginormous force that comes in and takes this place. They're going to be the ones that occupy it ultimately because it's going to be theirs. This is going to be new China. The Russians want the Arctic. They want Alaska back, and they want all of northern Arctic Canada, the three territories that lie in the north of Canada along the Arctic Sea. They want to turn the Arctic Sea into a Russian lake. They want all the immense amounts of mineral and fuel-based resources, all the hydrocarbons, everything. They want all of that stuff that's in the Arctic because it's enough to power Russia a full millennium into the future. That's why Russia wants to rule the Arctic. And China needs all the arable farmland it can get to feed its people. That's why they want North America. Arable farmland. That means they can irrigate it, plant crops on it, and grow food. So China wants the arable farmland. That is why they're going to get southern Canada for all its wheat production, along with the lower 48 with its food production capabilities, as they can grow a wide array of different things in the lower 48. And, the Russians and Chinese have made their intentions known in their Politburo meetings or in their Duma meetings. In the case of the Russians, the Chinese have the Politburo. They've made in speeches and their own private speeches, they've all made their intentions known of what they want to do to North America. They're going to divvy it up between the two. Russia's going to get the Arctic. China's going to get lower Canada and the lower 48. I even put that in my documentary, in the stories, the typed out stories. That is in there. That is absolutely in those stories of how they divvy it up between them. The Russians, of course, have to help the Chinese deal with the lower 48 because that's where the largest portion of our country is. So, of course, they're going to come in with the other allies of China, and with China, the biggest contributor by far of forces for all the obvious reasons. They're all going to have to deal with the lower 48 first, and then the Russians pull up to their Arctic territories when they decide to pull out of the lower 48 and go back to their new territories of Novoya Russia or Novoya USSR, which is new, or it would be CCP in Cyrillic, Novoya Russia. They're new territories that they acquire along the Arctic of North America. And they're also going to, take Europe for themselves too. Even in the Dmitry Duduman prophecies, when the Russian and Chinese leader are speaking together, these other subordinate leaders of these different areas of different nations, they all tell the Chinese leader, "We will fight for you." Like they're going to, join China's crusade, their megalomaniacal conquest of the West, China's. They're going to join China, and they're going to fight for China. They're going to fight for them. And the Russian leader, which is Putin, said to the Chinese leader, which is obviously Xi Jinping, the description fits him well. He says to him, you go ahead and take North America with all its people, and the land and its people. I do apologize, everybody. My phone had died on me. My phone just died on me, but I was saying ultimately that the Chinese are going to basically get North America, and Putin is going to get, the Arctic, of course, of North America, and he said he will be able to do what he wants with Europe, Putin. And we know the Chinese are in Europe, in Serbia, and other places, surely, there to help the Chinese, or to help the Russians, rather, their allies, take over Europe. They're absolutely going to help the Russians take over Europe, just as the Russians are going to help the Chinese take over the United States, along with other allies. The other allies will basically be like a foreign expeditionary force compared to the huge amount of forces Russia will contribute and the gargantuan behemoth, massive forces that China will be using to take over what they plan on colonizing. The lower 48 and lower Canada are going to be new China. And the Arctic of North America will be Novoya Russia, along with the rest of Asiatic and European Russia. And whatever other parts of the USSR get reunited. Hey, folks, here's a corny joke of the day. I guess it'll be a Soviet reunion. It'll be a Soviet reunion. They'll have a reunion. So, China and Russia are thick as thieves. They're going to help each other in their world conquest. They're going to destroy the West. They're going to humiliate the leaders of the West and their elites because they're going to take all their money. They're going to pull them out of their hidey holes, their little bunkers, like how we pulled Saddam Husse1n out of his bunker. They're going to pull the Western elites, you heard me, they're going to pull them out of their bunkers. They're going to humiliate them, turn them into slaves. In China, they will be Xi Jinping's footstool because the real 10 kings are going to be 10 kings of the East, the triumphant, victorious kings in World War III, conquest of Babylon, USA, and their allies. The real kings, the 10 kings that share power with the beast, the Antichrist, will be 10 Eastern kings. The New World Order will be their New World Order, not a Western New World Order. Because the BRICS are going to crush the Western Economic Forum. It's not the World Economic Forum, it's the Western Economic Forum. Because the West doesn't run the whole world, they just run their little block. The Eurasian bloc, the BRICS, and all of that is very different. They have very different agendas. And one agenda involves removing those they hate the most, which is us, the West, out of their way. They're going to destroy us. We have got a Flintstones future ahead of us, folks. A Flintstones future of occupation and foreign conquest by our foreign enemies. Why do you think I do what I do on this channel? I wish everybody would go and watch all my past work on the invasion. A lot of it's all in the playlists. Even the new audio book I'm doing that's very worthwhile to listen to. You can learn a lot from those things on how to navigate some of this, what it's going to look like, and incorporate that into your own personal emergency planning. China is the most powerful nation this world has ever known. Ever. Their industrial capacity, industrial might, their industrial base, all their factories, just all of it is immense. It's gargantuan. They produce the most steel. Steel is what's used in military production. Chemicals for munitions and steel than any other nation on the face of the earth. Their civil-military fusion policy, if they so needed it for industrial production, which they don't because they already have more military factories and larger ones than any other nation on earth, probably more than all the nations of the world combined. They have 500 humongous industrial complexes that are devoted to military production. Then they also have smaller cottage industry ones as well that are more like small warehouse or garage-sized types of places, like what we largely now have. Our old Cold War and World War II manufacturing base, it's gone. It's gone. We don't have it like we used to, folks. We still have some big factories, but it's just barely over a dozen. And here's China sitting over there with over 500. In addition to their smaller factories, they produce a billion, with a B, a billion tons of steel annually. We, between about 73 and 80 million with an M, any given year as of lately. As of lately. Russia actually produces very comparable numbers of steel to us. And they have half our population. They have half our population. So Russia has a pretty high rate of industrial production, and they gear a lot of theirs towards war production. Their arms manufacturing. They export a lot of weapons because They use a lot of the steel they produce for that purpose. Because their weapons are very cheap and affordable for other nations around the world. China keeps a lot of the weapons they produce for themselves. And they continually upgrade and pass down older weapons. They continue to keep them lethal enough to where they're still viable, but then they pass them down to like their second and third rate units, while the brand new cream of the crop stuff that they're churning out like it ain't nothing is kept by the first and some of their second rate units as it proliferates. So, even China's older upgraded stuff is still plenty deadly, plenty lethal on the battlefield. The Iraqis in the Gulf War, both Gulf Wars really, they didn't know how to use their Chinese and Soviet-made equipment worth a damn. They did not know how to use it. Otherwise, they'd have been a lot more effective. Plus, they didn't get the best of the exports anyway, because the Soviets actually, their version of the T-72s were actually a bit better than what they actually exported. They gave the Iraqis the cheap stuff, gave them a license to even build their own called the Babel tank. That thing was nothing but a third-rate T-72 that was produced inside of Iraq by license, in very small numbers anyway. But it was produced actually in the city of Beji, and I've driven through Beji before. It's like one of Iraq's few true industrial cities. They have oil refineries, they have manufacturing and steel plants in Beji, left over from the Saddam era. But anyhow, basically, China, their older stuff is also continually modernized. They put in things like combat data links, radars where it applies, gun stabilizers, laser rangefinders, IR and night vision optics, explosive reactive armor upgrade kits. They increased the lethality of the weapons on it. They have a breach, a bore, even though they took the L7 gun and upgraded it. I have the whole Chi-Com tank video with all the specs on it. They on their older tanks like the Type 59D or like their Type 69, 79 series, they have this old L7 gun like we used to have on our M60 tanks, which the Marines used to use, which actually is a pretty damn good gun. It was still lethal enough to kill T-72s on the battlefield. Basically, the Chi-Coms upgraded that gun, made it longer and more lethal with more range. Gave it an extra kilometer of range. And it can fire anti-tank guided missiles from it, which can destroy even our best tanks. So, yeah, they also have depleted uranium shells and sabot rounds that are of the tungsten variety, which are still plenty lethal. Even out of a 105 millimeter elongated, higher velocity tank main gun, still plenty lethal. The gun ammo pairing is still plenty lethal, in addition to the other upgrades like the gun stabilizer, allowing it to shoot on the move accurately and so on and so forth. Yeah, and they have swarms of those older upgraded vehicles. Plus all their new stuff. They're cranking it out left and right like it ain't nothing. They're starting to proliferate it through all their... they've already got it proliferated through all their first-rate units. Now it's being passed throughout their reserve forces because they've been building like nonstop, like some fools, tank and aircraft and, armored vehicle building fools, ammo producing fools, rifle producing fools. They've been meeting quotas nonstop. While we, on the other hand, have been gutting and purging our militaries, our industries. We cannot compete with China on any level plane. There is no level plane, truly. Not now. There's no way for us to compete with a nation whose industrial capacity dwarfs ours by a humongous gulf. They produce 11.3 or 11.4 times the steel that we produce annually. Let me put it in these terms. China's steel production is basically as big, or a little tiny bit larger, I should say, than the next 20 nations combined. So, how are we going to compete with somebody like that? Their economy in real terms is basically a $19 trillion economy. And then, of course, there's, the purchasing power parity aspect of everything, which makes their defense budget in actuality like basically equal to our defense budget. And we piss away most of our defense budget anyway, so really, they end up spending more effectively and getting more for their money because they're not pissing it all away on BS projects that don't even work half the time. Like the garbage-ass F-35, which is a worthless plane. We should have stuck with the F-22. Tried and true F-22. Then they got the Zumwalt, which that thing is notorious for its engine problems. It's a piece of trash. And that was supposed to be the newest destroyer. So, look, we're doing horribly in the field of, weapons production and maintenance. We're not producing parts in adequate enough numbers to replace broken parts. Our production processes are not streamlined and efficient to be able to mass produce any of this high-tech stuff at a high rate. We don't even produce the electronic components here at home that we need for such systems. We get them from China because it's a lowest bidder sort of situation, not from Taiwan, but from China, our enemy, who wants to destroy us, enslave our people, take our women as you-know-what type of slaves. Yeah, that's who we get our defense equipment from, basically. You might as well say that, because the components that go into the production of our defense equipment come from them, giving them a back door, an easy back door at that. So, in real terms, they dwarf us economically because our GDP has shrunk by over a third. Plus, our economy is built on funny money, Ponzi schemes, trash currency, a petrodollar scheme. It's about to collapse. All these Ponzi schemes and funny money and credit. That's what our economy is mostly built on, folks. It's really like a $12 trillion economy, especially after the small business, which was the backbone of the American economy. They killed small business in 2020. Evil shit, folks. Evil. Putting people on the streets over some BS lie. Shrinking our GDP by over a third. The Fed admitted to it 2 years ago. How bad do you think things are now in real terms? Horrible. China has far surpassed us. Nobody wants to admit it because the truth is inconvenient, or the truth hurts people's pride. Yeah, well, it hurt mine too, but I had to get over it because the truth has no bias. Once you detach yourself, when you truly are awake and you realize how evil all leaders are, it doesn't matter what nation they're in. They're all evil. It doesn't even matter if it's our nation. All leaders are evil. Once you realize how evil all these elites of the West and the East all around the world are, the truth has no bias. So I can sit here and talk up the Russians and Chinese where it's applicable, where it applies, like the sizes of their forces, the capabilities that they have, because that's the truth. Or I can talk us up where it applies for us, and I have where it applies. But I mostly have to talk us down because it's the truth. We're going down, folks. We're going down. Mayday, mayday. Flip the flag upside down. We're going down. Like it or not. I hate it. You don't understand how much I hate it. I served in our army, for God's sake. You think I'm happy about this? Do you? And what they've done to us is the product of total treason, It's a disgrace. It's disgusting. We've been sold down the river. And this land is going to have a new master under new management. And that's called China and Russia and their other pals that stick around to help the world's superpower, China, and get rewarded in turn. You don't think China's going to reward their allies for coming along on their conquest with them? Of course they are. Of course they are. Looting rights, like Dmitry Duduman said. China will give them looting rights for certain things. They're going to reward them or pay them, like I put in my stories, where they paid certain countries to continue to stick around as filler units until Xi Jinping could raise up more troops of his own to come in and replace them. Because you have to rotate troops, and this is an enormously, immensely vast nation. So the troops that invaded initially, you can leave them stick around for about a year or so, but then you got to rotate them, you got to bring them back to China and send in replacements. And that's what they're going to have to do eventually. But until then, he wanted his, loyal buddies to stick around, and he would pay them to stay as filler units. And they did in my stories. But that's exactly how it would be in real life, too, for a nation this vast. Which is why I tell you, I don't care what the psyops that they come out with say, that the woke regime, this woke, rogue, globalist regime, I don't care what they say they're going to do. Saying it and doing it is two different things. They can talk about implementing a digi whatever all they want to. It doesn't mean it's going to work out like they think it is or like they say it will. No. If they're going to implement that, it'll look just like it did in my Syrian style internal conflict docuseries. It'll flop, it'll fail. Plus, how are you going to use digital money in places where there's no power or where power is very patchy at best? At best. You can't. Who would use it anyway? Other economies would be cropping up to replace it in the different factional areas that these different factions controlled, as shown in my documentary. Folks, I'm not a prophet, and I'm not a teacher. I just do a shit ton of research. Why? Because I want to back up prophecy. I want to show prophecy's true. So I go and do research and I dig around and I find things that support it all the time. Whether that's Jeremiah's prophecies in the book of Jeremiah, or whether that's Revelation prophecy, whatever it is, I find facts all the time that are lining up and backing up prophecy. But I look at more of the physical aspects where some people only just talk about the spiritual. I like to do the physical stuff and overlay it with the spiritual to show that the two do go hand in hand, that the spiritual is manifesting in the physical, and here's how it's happening. And I show the mechanics of it, down to the last detail of it. Who else is doing that? I show you how battles look I show you how battles are looking on battle maps. I show you what the conditions look like on the ground as it's happening, through the stories, through the characters. Who else is doing that? I have real combat experience. I include that in those stories I write to show the tactical aspects of it, the reality and finality of it when people lose limbs or they die in horrible ways. That's real life, folks. That's what I want people to get ready for. No, you're not going to fend off the Chi-Coms with a can of bear spray or use a crossbow. That's lunacy. Lunacy. It's not going to work on nobody else either. It's going to get you killed, if anything. It's just going to get you killed. That's a joke. That's a crock of shit. Don't ever take advice from anybody that ain't been there and ain't done it. Ain't ever experienced it. Don't ever take no advice from people that ain't lived real life, reality, in real situations. That's who you need to be looking to take advice from. And it all lines up with the Bible too, so I don't want to hear any of that. That's garbage. That's garbage. If anyone speaking against self-defense is speaking against the word of God, because God doesn't contradict himself and he never changes, and there's examples of self-defense all throughout the Bible. And you need to know about it. Read the Bible for yourselves. I ain't no Bible teacher. I'm just telling you that I know enough about the Bible that I know what's true and what ain't. And a lot of false doctrines are out there taking holds of people right now. So be very careful. Always be leery. Be cautious. No, I like to dig in the physical stuff because it backs up the prophetic. It backs up prophecy. I'm fascinated by prophecy, which is why I want to prove it to be correct. I want people to see how real prophecy is. That's why I go dig through the physical so that I can show how it matches prophecy. That's what God has endowed upon me to do. What he's put on my heart, my mind to do. He says, Chad, go show these people how real my prophecy is. Go dig up physical facts to show how real my word is. Yes, God. Yes, Father. Yes, I will. So that's what I do here on this channel. I look at all the physical. I research. I compile research into uber realistic presentations for your own benefit, but also to show prophecy manifesting in the physical, what it looks like, what it'll look like, how it'll look, and why, down to the last mechanical details of it. So, that's why I do what I do here. So, China, the Red Dragon, is the world's superpower in real terms. Don't ever listen to nobody that lies and says they're broke or they're having problems, because they sure as hell ain't. They're the biggest economy on earth in real terms. Their money, they're doing a digi-yuan, a petro-yuan. They have the most gold holdings. They have more gold than anyone on earth. They hold the most gold. Over 6,400 tons. Over. Russia has the second most. And Russia is really good with their money. Their foreign debt is almost nothing compared to other nations. For a developed nation to only have 250 billion with a B, billion in debt. Well, we have trillions and trillions and trillions. We have like dozens of trillions of dollars in debt. Really, in actuality, it's over 3 times what our true GDP is, which is about 12 trillion. It's over 3 times as big. But in official numbers, in quote-unquote official, in air quotes, it's over 2 times. But it's really like over 3 times, folks. It's really over 3 times. And if you add the unfunded liabilities, man, you don't even want to go there. You don't even want to go there. You'd never pay that. Ever. You can't even pay even a fraction of a percent of the interest on it. Ever. Ever. No, this system was set up to fail. And it will fail. It'll fail. It'll fall on its face. And there will be no great reset. Without the West, how can there be a great reset? No, it'll be an Eastern-dominated NWO with the 10 kings and the beast, who they'll cede their power to. It's not going to be a Western NWO. They'll have no power. Their whole power base will be eviscerated and gone. How are they going to implement an NWO? They have no more security forces. They have nobody to enforce anything. They're gone. They're out of the picture, folks. No, it's going to be a Sino-Russian world. They're going to be the enforcers. And when they give their power to the beast, nobody will be able to make war with the beast. If you've got China backing you, the Chinese gold, the Chinese industry, the Chinese economy, the Chinese immensely, ginormous, freakishly just monstrosity of a military behind you, who can make war with you? Who can make war with you? Then you throw in Russia, China's, brother, throw them in there to boot. Who can make war with you? Nobody. Nobody. Even if the other 8 kings didn't give their power to the beast too for 1 hour. In Bible time, it's 1 hour, which isn't very long. We're talking months. We're only talking months, a matter of months, that this one world system stays together before it starts to see cracks and fissures and, falls apart. At about the same time God's wrath hits. But for some months, for a matter of months, it'll hold together. The 10 kings and the beast will reign together for 1 hour, it says, which is a matter of months, before it all starts to fall apart. Likely due to greed and infighting, because Satan can't help himself, and he always eats his own. Always. They'll turn on each other, and they'll fall apart. It's so funny. Even Satan's pathetic one-world government doesn't even stay together but for a matter of months. Even Hitler at least lasted 12 years. Come on now. This one-world thing, and it don't even last but a matter of months before it all falls apart. What a joke. But either way, it'll be an Eastern dominated NWO. There will be no West. They're going to pull these Western elites out of their hidey holes, like how we pulled Saddam out of his. They're going to make a big deal out of it. It'll be all over Chinese TV, Russian TV, Pakistani, Iranian TV, all of it. It'll be all over. It'll be televised. Everybody will see it. They're going to humiliate these people. They're going to humiliate them. Oh, weren't you Klaus Schwab? Oh, Klaus Schwab, aren't you Mr. Big? Aren't you Mr. Big Guy? Now you go to camp. You build Xi Jinping big pagoda. You push boulder up mountain, then you sew tennis shoes. And we give you bowl of rice. Yeah. It's kind of funny, but it's not at the same time. It's like, they are going to do stuff like that. They are going to do stuff like that. I just crack jokes about it, but they are going to do stuff like that. They're going to do it to the common people and the leaders. It's all over the Bible too, folks. Anytime a nation is judged, their ruling class all the way down to the lowest vagabond gets judged. Nobody escapes judgment. Nobody. And guess what? We're stuck with China and Russia all the way until the end of time at the Battle of Armageddon. We're stuck with them until the end. Whereas the West gets destroyed before that even happens. So they destroy the West. Then at the end of time, when Yeshua Messiah returns to establish his millennial kingdom and defeat the beast and his false prophet, and of course the 10 kings to boot, but when he comes back, he's going to destroy them. He's going to destroy them. But until then, we're stuck with them. China will be the world superpower until the end of time. So, they're specifically mentioned as being at the Battle of Armageddon in Revelation. The kings of the East, China. Of course, they're, maybe some of their allies too, like North Korea, maybe India even, maybe. India would be another big contributor. Of course, Pakistan, a key ally of China besides North Korea, and Iran, another key ally of China. Yeah, the kings of the East will be there. Russia can be used interchangeably as a king of the East and king of the North too. But the Chinese, they're the kings of the East for sure. They're the world superpower. They're the most powerful nation the world's ever known. In real terms and numbers, capabilities. They call us a superpower, but we're truly living off our past reputation. We're living off our past reputation. It's like a credit card with nothing on it. You got the card itself, but you ain't got shit on it. That's America. Well, we have our reputation, but there's nothing to enforce it. There's nothing backing it up in reality, in real numbers, real capabilities, real anything. We're done, folks. We're done. We're living on borrowed time. Get ready. Shit's about to get real. It's about to get real. You better get out of this whole little, whatever, the Disney World mentality, Disneyland mentality, as far as, thinking that life is a merry-go-round and, it's everything is swell and nice. And no. All of that is coming to an end. The roller coaster ride, the merry-go-round, Disneyland is about to close, folks. It's about to close. And you're going to experience the real world, the world of war, of poverty. That's the real world of human suffering, all of it. You're going to experience it. You're going to get front row seats to it. You better be ready for it, folks. You have no time to be listening to these imbeciles and false teachers and liars who are spreading false doctrines about and giving false hope with this pre-trib. Like Ken said in his video. I ended up sharing it because that's absolutely true. And false teachers who preach against self-defense too. That's a heresy and it's a lie. It is heretical because it's directly opposed to the word and what the word has in it and says in it. Yeah, it's a heresy. I'm going to call it like I see it. So you know what? You listen to who you want to. I can't tell you who to listen to. But you would be wise. You'd be wise to read the Bible for yourself and ask for God's discernment and wisdom and understanding it. And stop listening to people who overtly say things that go against it. Because if you read the word, you'll know who's speaking against it. Because you'll hear what they say and be like, well, that doesn't sync up with what I read in this story or this book or whatever, or this verse, chapter. So, it's all about discernment, God-given discernment, wisdom, and knowing and understanding the signs of the times. Things are going to change, folks. Like I put in my video I shared of that map battle about the Syrian internal conflict, I put in the pinned comment too, the things that old paradigms that people think are always going to be around are not going to be around. Things can change at any moment. Paradigms can shift. There can be a paradigm shift. Things can collapse, fall apart. New paradigms can arise. Power vacuums can arise. And new entities and people can arise to fill those things. Like in my Syrian style Second American internal conflict with all the different factions. You'd also be wise to go and make an entire day to sit through that whole documentary. Yeah, it's low budget, but it's every bit worth listening to the whole way through. The first video and about half of the second are all basically a big story, like the background story of how it all started. We began with the collapse, and then the dominoes just began to fall, one after another, after another, after another. And it introduces all the different factions with all their leadership, and how they came to create their own factions and grow them and become these, big armies that they became later on when I show the map battles. Those things are absolutely real. They're hyper real. It's as real as you're ever going to see it before it even happens, folks. That's as real as you're ever going to see it before it even happens. That's there to showcase the concepts of factional internal conflicts. I use Syria heavily as a template for that, but I also used other modern civil conflicts. But Syria especially, that can teach you a lot about how those things work. But I sprinkled in aspects of other internal conflicts, modern ones, so that I could create a stew, well, I guess you can call it a stew, proverbially speaking, of different modern conflicts amalgamated together to showcase, along with the diverse issues that exist in America, to showcase what this would look like here. With real precedents, as in things that, lay the foundation for what I put in it. With real precedents existing right now, in real time, they're coming true, just like in that documentary. Go watch it. You'll see. If you're paying attention, you'll see everything that's going on around you right now, showcased in that documentary. At one point or another, you'll see it. I called a lot of things in that work before it even happened. Even in the predictions I made almost 5 months ago. I called a lot of what was happening as it pertained to the food and fuel collapse and even Ukraine collapsing. Yeah, I'm a little bit late on the Ukraine collapse thing. It hasn't just happened yet, but I allowed myself margins of error too. But it is what it is. I mean, the Ukrainians, incredibly, are being held together by some sort of duct tape and chewing gum and rubber bands, proverbially speaking, but maybe staples. I don't know. But they've somehow, lasted this long. Surely, though, they aren't going to last much longer at the rate they're being destroyed. There's no way. They should have collapsed probably last month or maybe even in June. Realistically, they should have. But their fighting spirit, it gives them a hell of a drive. Plus all the Western aid that can be thrown at them, too, helps a bit. But surely there's no way they can continue. They're down to old men. They've been down to old men, holding up entire sectors of their front lines. Because all their best troops were either destroyed, captured, or they're still stuck in pockets in the Donbass. So that's the situation with all that. Russia hasn't even committed all that many forces to Ukraine. Hardly any at all. 70 battalions, that ain't nothing. 70 battalions. That's only 60 to 65,000 troops when you consider the size of a Russian battalion on average. So NATO, their rapid reaction battalions along the Russian frontier areas from the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, all the way to Romania, they've got 12 rapid reaction battalions spread out. 12. So for expediency's sake, let's round up. That's 12,000 troops that are spread out throughout a roughly 1,000-mile range. It's a little more than 1,000 miles, but it's roughly so if you divvy that up, that's like one battalion, every 700, 800 miles. That's ridiculous, man. It's ridiculous. So that's supposed to stop Russia's big military, which they hardly send any into Ukraine. Russia has a vastly bigger military than Ukraine, too. But they only sent in this small, tiny force. And that's not even their best forces. If you take their reserves and their paramilitary and their active into account, they have 3.5 million. Their regular military and reserves, just those, is 3.2. Then you add their 300,000 paramilitary to it. That's 3.5 million that Russia has. China has almost 30. So if Russia wanted to, they can steamroll Europe. Just even by themselves they could. These puny little armies of Europe that I've read those off to you before, many times even in past live shows. I've read the numbers between Russia and the 4 biggest Western European NATO contributors. I omitted Poland because technically they're Eastern European, but Germany, Italy, Britain, and France is who I read off and compared them combined against Russia and all their numbers. It's not even a competition. Then you throw China into the Balkans, where they are in Serbia, in a key strategically vital location where they can lash out at Greece, Italy, Germany, and really Poland. Czech Republic and Slovakia, Hungary, and Austria. They can lash out at all those places. They're all within a 500-mile radius. 3 to 500 miles. They can lash out at all that from where they sit in Serbia. Of course, the Chinese are moving stuff around in other parts of Europe. Of course, in probably places like Belarus. Russia, of course, allowed them as an ally to move their forces through Russia, just so they could help them with their invasion of Europe at a future time. Then you got Chi-Com heavy assets coming in through Montenegro into Serbia, through the ports. You had Chi-Com cargo planes, documented fact, flying nonstop from China to Serbia, back and forth, dropping off troops and weapons. They've been building up in Serbia for quite some time. I showed you the Xi Jinping billboards. Everywhere the Chi-Com troops go, or their power and influence goes, Xi Jinping shows up in propaganda. Serbia ain't even their country. I mean, they're an ally of China, obviously, but that's not even China. And there's Xi Jinping stuff everywhere. They're taking over, folks. They're taking over. The Chinese are. They are the world's superpower. They have their forces all over the world. They have their Belt and Road scheme. They have the world's biggest economy in real terms, biggest industrial base and manufacturing sector in real terms, biggest military manufacturing capabilities in real terms, steel production, chemical production, bus and automotive production, all of it. Just their capacity to produce is immensely gargantuan. Their economy is diverse also, too. Their high-tech sector of high-tech stuff, it's immensely bigger than ours could ever even imagine or hope to be. They're making miniature artificial stars. They've got particle colliders. They're the number one in AI. They've got hypersonic missiles mastered. They can cloak their missiles. They can do all these different things. They have directed energy weapons mastered. I mean, they've got anti-satellite weapons. They got it all. They've got it all. They've probably got even stuff that we don't even know about, too. But all the stuff I've just mentioned, it's well beyond the mass-produced phase. It's mass-produced and in mass deployment. Mass deployment. It's not hidden away in some underground lab in a place like, area whatever number, ascribe a number. It's not in some secret underground lab, never mass-produced, never mass-deployed, never had people trained on it. No, their stuff gets mass-produced and mass-deployed with people trained on it to use it. We don't have no AIT for, anti-gravity craft. There's no AIT for that. There's no TRADOC base in America where they train you to pilot anti-gravity craft. Come on, man. The military is not like what people think it is. It's not like what people have to get trained. And if you got top secret weapons that never get seen by nobody, you ain't going to have people that can use them. Not in no great numbers, other than maybe like the test crew or whatever that's been trained on it extensively and sworn to secrecy. But you don't have mass amounts of people that are trained on those things. So it's ineffective. It's really of no consequence at that point. China doesn't have to worry about secrecy like we do. They're a closed, totalitarian police state regime that has everybody under tabs and has mastered AI to the point where they can surveil everybody in China. All the cameras they've got. You cannot be a spy in China. There's no way. It's a joke. They don't have to worry about that at their state factories, where they have rigorous screening processes for the employees that work on top secret projects, where they have them tailed and spied on by the MSS and their AI programs. This is real stuff, y'all. So I'm going to wind this up. I thank everybody for coming. This is a very, very important video. China is a behemoth. They're the biggest threat we as a land face because they're the ones that are going to be coming here, taking it, butchering, genociding, and enslaving our people. There, I said it. The Red Chinese. I'm not saying Chinese people are bad. I'm talking about their CCP regime has designs on this place and its people. It's prophetic, too. What I do on this channel backs up the prophetic. So I deal with the physical stuff, but I overlay it with prophecy to prove that prophecy is true for people who would deny it is. It's good to see things lining up. Now let me see who's all in here before I go. I want to say my greetings to people and farewells, too. Good to see you, Cheeto, and Eli, and who else? Hey, great to see you, Aaron. Lovely to see you. Welcome. Hope you're doing well, my friend. Mary Flasha, Nick, China owns a whole bunch of land, Nick. They're actually one of the biggest holders of American farmland. They own more than even Bill Gates does. You can look that up and take that to the bank. Look it up. China also has bought up a whole ton of properties like old warehouses, self-storage places, apartment blocks, houses, real estate, I say it again, real estate, more than Vanguard, more than BlackRock. And besides that, the Chinese have infiltrated those two too. So it's not like that matters. They've infiltrated basically everything in the West and subverted it for their own aims. As the saying goes, we would sell China the rope that they would use to hang us with. And that includes our arrogant, stupid elites that think they're going to have their great reset, but they're never going to have it. That's an illusion. They're going to get destroyed by China and Russia, who are going to have their new world order. It'll be theirs. So, some people believe psyops, and they think that stuff's going to happen, but it's not. Men make plans and God laughs. The East is going to have the new world order. It'll be their elites who have their new world order, not the West. The West basically got played. They got played hard. The CCP doesn't give a rat's ass about the Western elites, just so everybody knows. Neither do the Russians, really. Neither do the Islamic elites in the Mideast, so they could care less too. I'm sure they're vastly sick of the West by now, after how the West has basically laid waste to their lands, like what we did in Iraq and other places, and how we've basically offended them in every sort of way. 7 ways to Sunday, as the saying goes. They could care less about us too. Let's just be real about it. So they're building their own Eurasian bloc as a counter to the Western Economic Forum, led by the Chinese and their Belt and Road, their Shanghai Cooperation Organization, all these different sub-entities that belong to the Eurasian bloc, led by China, but also by Russia. Not to denigrate Russia, but I sort of look at Russia as the junior partner in that relationship, because there's obviously a massive size differential, but in between the two, China's drastically bigger. But Russia, still for their size, is enormously powerful. They are the second most powerful nation on earth after China, in real terms. China's the most powerful, by far. So, let's see who's all in here. Mario, good to see you. Just Man, and who else is in here? Stacy, Gregory, good to see you, and Casey Ellis, good to see you, and hey Tommy, great to see you, bud. Vitra, good to see you. Radar, hey Radar. Fear No Man, what's up, Ken? What's up, man? How you doing? Hope you're doing all right. Daughter of the Most High, good to see you too. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Jennifer, if you're in here, I hope you are. I love you. And, all right, everybody. You all have a blessed night. Thank you all for coming. I hope this was a powerful presentation that basically helped put a sense of urgency in people to look at some of the mechanics involved in this stuff, like the research compilations turned into presentations, all found in my playlists or in my community. Go look at, you'll even find all my past shows. I put them in a miscellaneous list of miscellaneous shows like this one, and I also put them in my Friday show list. I've got playlists for the invasion work, and I've got a second American Syrian-style internal conflict playlist, which shows exactly how this country disintegrates and how the paradigm changes. It's not going to be a left-right thing, folks. It's going to be this country falls apart because a power vacuum gets created by the weak central regime for castrating its own military forces and security forces. Hence, the lack of an ability to contain such a thing. Different factions will have different strongmen rising up, promising the people in their areas better things, who will then unite around it. Every bit like Syria, folks. Every bit like that. every bit like that. And they'll all emerge when they see the power vacuum that ends up being created by the weakened regime and all the civil unrest and everything. They'll use that as a screen, like a curtain by which they will emerge from. And then after our internal conflict, which will begin as soon as we have our big collapse, that's what will set off the Syrian style situation, the big collapse, the big one where everything goes bye for good. That'll be when the Syrian style internal situation erupts. Then shortly thereafter, when we have basically ripped ourselves to pieces and there's we're basically so weak we can't even lift a finger to do much of anything, China and Russia will just come in here and just basically carpet munition this place, saturate this place into oblivion, and then they'll rebuild it in their own image as their colony. CCP colony number 1. like Chinese restaurant number 1 or number 2. They like to number everything in China. It's kind of funny. But yeah, this will be New China and New Russia, Novaya Russia. That'll be the basically the Arctic Circle and whatever parts of Europe and their Soviet reunion that gets done. So all right, y'all have a blessed night. Thank you all for coming.